Fahrenheit 11/9, which is the latest from Michael Moore. So the title is an inverted riff on, I know this sounds obvious, but it's worth stating, is an inverted riff on Fahrenheit 9/11, which at the time became the highest grossing documentary of all time, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. And at the beginning, we see the two titles crossing over. So Fahrenheit 9/11 was a play on the Ray Bradbury Fahrenheit 451, which is to do, it's a dystopian future thing, the temperature at which pages of books burn. And at the beginning of Fahrenheit 11/9, we see Fahrenheit 9/11, flipping over. So the film is making a very, very explicit connection, and therefore back to to the previous history of that. And the 11/9 refers to the election of Donald Trump. The election was on the 8th, and it was the 9th that the result came through, and that Hillary Clinton conceded, and Trump won. And it is a documentary about Trump in the White House, which begins very much in the style of Fahrenheit 9/11, basically asking how the fruitcake did we get here. And the documentary then, it does two things. On the one hand, it follows Trump's ascent, and as per Michael Moore's version of the story, the whole thing begins because he's annoyed that Gwen Stefani is earning more than he is on television, so he makes a kind of bogus run for president and then is surprised when people seem to get behind him. So the whole thing is a bad joke that suddenly becomes TV news, and the next thing you know, it's actually happening. And there is a certain amount of self-aggrandizing of the TV footage saying, well, Michael Moore said you need to take this seriously. Also, there's a bit of, soul-searching as well. Michael Moore showing us stuff about his own peculiar links with Kushner and Steve Bannon, who were involved in premiering and weirdly distributing some of his early films. There's an encounter that he had with Trump on the Roseanne show back in 1998, in which Trump says that he really loved Roger and Me, but hopes that Michael Moore never does a documentary about him. And in fact, Moore admits that he went soft on him because he was told not to have a kind of on-air confrontation. But what the film then does is sort of twofold. On the one hand, all the stuff that led to Trump's ascent, and on the other hand, the failure, in Michael Moore's view, of the Democrats to take seriously the responsibilities that they should have done. So he kind of ends up blaming both sides and being actually quite interestingly bad. I mean, whether or not you agree with the politics behind it, I think he argues it in a way which is engaging. And that I have in the past had many problems with Michael Moore's documentaries, not least the kind of the grandstanding and the stunts, which I think never work that well. There's a certain amount of that here, but not so much. Some of the strongest stuff is the stuff about the Flint water scandal, and how that happened, and how basically an entire community was effectively set aside in the pursuit of profit, and how those in power allowed that to happen. It also points the finger at Obama for his perceived failure to respond properly to that crisis. And the key thread of it is that in this kind of environment, everyone loses faith in politics, and everybody, this is how this sort of thing happens, when people just think that everyone who's in power is an elite and separate, and that's when the Trump phenomenon happens. But against that, Michael Moore finds a glimmer of hope in young people who have found themselves at the sharp end of the most terrible crisis, one of which, incidentally, Jamie Lee Curtis was referring to, and them taking control of a world in which the future, if it is to be solved, will be solved by them. Here's a clip.
Man, it is truly the lack of political will from our Democrats, and their backbone is literally just missing, right? And you put both of those components together, and then on top of that, you taking money from the same folks the Republicans taking money from. The Democratic Party should be recruiting extraordinary, ordinary Americans that actually get on the same bus as their constituents. Actually have kids in those public schools and understand what it feels like for a teacher not to get paid real salaries or lack of resources, right?
The definition of electoral insanity is trying to re-elect these same guys over and over again and expecting our country to be any different.
For the first time, Democrats will have an all female statewide ticket. And on that list, Rashida Tlaib. She is poised to become the first Muslim woman in Congress.
We're not ready to give up on the party. We're just ready to take it over. And let's put some people in there that get it, because we felt the
Take
pain.
it over.
Take it over. Take it over, Michael.
And as I said, the strongest voices are the voices that you hear of school kids. There's one brilliant moment in which they talk about a revolution that's happening through social media. And it was actually quite good to hear social media spoken of in such positive terms, because, you know, we hear so much about the negative side of social media. And I think that, you know, although Michael Moore himself remains a sort of somewhat problematic figure, what the documentary never does is it never feels like it absolutely wrests the argument to the ground. But what I appreciated about it was that it does offer a glimmer of hope as I said, in the shape of a younger generation of people who and the main thesis of it is that when people are disenfranchised, these kind of things can happen. And actually, the thing that's going to change the future is a younger generation who are no longer going to put up with not being represented. And there is a repetition of themes that we've heard before, but obviously because those themes are very close to Michael Moore. So I felt that he was very sincere about it. How much actual impact the film may or may not have, it's impossible to tell. I mean, certainly it's nothing like the scale of Fahrenheit 9/11. It's a much less. Well, I still think personally the best documentary about Trump was the absolutely brilliant "You've Been Trumped," which is, you know, long before he was a president, when he was talking about Scotland and the golf courses. But I think it's a sincere work. There are things in it that felt, you know, as I said, passionate and sincere, and there is less of the stunty stuff, which I don't like, because I just feel it kind of feels a little bit pointless. So anyway, Fahrenheit 11/9.